what are the clearest evidences of the U.S. supporting jihadist states, supporting anti-Semites that you know of?
All right, I'll go first, but I must say, Ricardo, these questions of yours, each one needs an entire hour and an entire show. So we'll get back to that. Here is where I'm going to diverge from Francisco's thought. He was absolutely correct about the historical nature of the so-called friendly administration in the United States toward the Jews. Do not think that. Remember, United States would have never entered the war if Japan had not bombed Pearl Harbor, and then Germany declared war on us December 10th, a few days later, and that put us in the war. Not one concentration camp was liberated. We celebrate the liberators, but actually they were going somewhere else, and they accidentally came upon a concentration camp and said, "What's in there?" No railroad tracks were bombed. There was no effort to resettle refugees. The Jews were turned away, and the leaflets were not the leaflets saying "Do not harm the Jews." Millions were printed. None were dropped. The world knew what was going on in the concentration camps, not only from the newsreels, not only from the December 1944 warning to the world that we will prosecute for extermination, but even the newsreels of the Russians as they came across in December, liberating Majdanek and others, putting out the newsreels and the film. And the reason that I, on the Edwin Black Show, which anyone can see at theedwinblackshow.com, started a series called Kristallnacht 2.0 and the Farhud and Yom HaShoah, can it happen again? And now I've coalesced all of those into my notion of the second Holocaust, was because, yes, so many elements in the United States were deeply embedded in the Biden administration, and they were, and I and others were predicting that if the Democrats won again, the Jews would be looking at a second dispossession, a second Holocaust. But the train was halted.
Okay.
Donald Trump.
Okay, great. We'll touch into Donald Trump later. I'm sure that's going to be very interesting.
That's the answer to your question.
Great. Francisco, what do you, if you want me to repeat the questions, what
Please.
are the clearest evidences of U.S. support for anti-Semites and terrorists, and a demonstration that they have not really been allies of Israel?
Right. Well, I think that Edwin Black's research is actually quite eloquent on the question of the true position of the U.S. power elite versus, towards the Jews and towards the Jewish state, because what Edwin Black has documented, and he will forever remain a historic figure because of this, is that he showed us that the entire process in Nazi Germany would have been impossible, but for the support that the German Nazis got, and before the German Nazis, the German eugenicists got from the American eugenicists. So the top industrialists in the United States, principally the Rockefeller and Carnegie networks, although of course there were others involved. And then there's also the involvement of IBM in the technical details, the information processing details required for the Holocaust, right? So all of that, and Edwin was mentioning other stuff that's very important. So, for example, they never bombed the railways going to the camps. They never dropped the leaflets, like he said. I think those are very important observations because they're all consistent with a general attitude in the U.S. power elite that was very favorable towards the extermination of the European Jews. And in fact, in the middle of the war, mid-level functionaries of the Treasury Department produced a document called The Complicity of This Government in the Murder of Jews. And that document, they documented in that document all of the things that the U.S. government was doing that were assisting the mass killing of Jews in Europe. It's a very damning document. So we have all of that happening during the war. After the war, there's also very damning evidence. For example, as historian Christopher Simpson documented with a bunch of stuff that he obtained through the Freedom of Information Act, at least tens of thousands of war criminals that were part of Adolf Hitler's intelligence infrastructure in Eastern Europe, in Fremde Heer Oost, Eastern armies. All of that was absorbed to create the CIA. And the people in charge of the process were once again the Rockefellers, who were essentially running the CIA through their friend and retainer, Allen Dulles. So there's a consistency there during the war, after the war, and then also before the war, because of the entire eugenics movement was happening before the war, and it was creating German eugenics and fostering and nurturing the growth of German Nazis. So there's a continuation. Now, what could you expect from these people in the post-war? Well, I think that what you could expect is the Oslo peace process, so-called, because what they did was introduce into the Jewish state, because that's a diplomatic process that was created by the U.S. So they forced Israel to accept a terrorist group that was created by the leaders of the Nazi final solution to continue it in Israel. That was done by the U.S. And there's no arguing that the U.S. didn't know what it was doing, that the U.S. bosses didn't know what they were doing, because I was able to document the origins of PLO Fatah in 2 weeks, and also the role that PLO Fatah played in the creation of Jihadi Iran, which means to repeat the Holocaust. So the policy, there's many other policies I could mention, but that's the most important one. The policy of U.S. bosses in the post-war has been the destruction of the Jewish state. So Edwin believes that things have changed with Trump. I disagree. I don't think that anything as powerful as the U.S. deep state would allow Trump even to take office if he were not part of their team. And I think that the early signs of the Trump 2.0 are in fact consistent with continuity, and the details we have seen that suggest otherwise are just a lot of management of reality. And when you look at the broad panorama, what we have is more attack against Israel. Israel is still in grave danger